My name is Ellie, and the night my apartment filled with poison was the night I realized I was utterly alone. I called my father, choking on the chemical fumes, and his reply, "We're at the movies with Kelsey. Don't be dramatic." That moment didn't just burn, it branded me. And what I didn't know yet was that the fire wasn't finished. Not in my apartment. Not in my life. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching this from? Drop your location in the comments. And if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, this one's for you. It started with a smell. At first, I thought maybe it was the neighbor's trash, something acrid and sour like bleach gone rancid. But then it thickened, coated my throat, turned the corners of my apartment into an invisible maze of suffocation. I cracked a window. Nothing. The wind outside only pushed more of it in, swirling the scent into every inch of my little one-bedroom unit like some malicious fog. By 10:41 p.m., I was sitting on my bed, phone pressed to my ear, fingers trembling. It was raining hard outside, classic Oregon winter, and the thunder felt personal, like it was announcing something, like it knew. "Dad," I whispered as soon as he picked up. "There's this chemical smell. I don't know where it's coming from, it's strong. I think something's wrong." There was a pause, a rustling sound. Then his voice, casual, bored. "Ellie, it's late. We're at the movies with Kelsey. Can it wait?" I blinked. "Wait, I think there's a leak or maybe something burning. I feel dizzy. Please, can you just come check? I don't feel right." A sigh. "You always overreact. You probably left something out. Just open a window and go to bed. We'll call you in the morning." He hung up before I could reply. For a moment, I stared at the glowing screen, then at the empty apartment around me. My chest rose and fell too fast. I reached for my inhaler, though I hadn't needed it in years, and took a puff. It didn't help. I called again. Voicemail. I texted, "Please, I think there's a gas leak. I need help." No response. That was when I knew, not just that I was on my own, but that I had always been. And not by accident. See, Kelsey was the porcelain one. My younger sister, the golden child with ballet recitals and allergy lists and parents who hovered like satellites. I was the fixer, the shadow. The one who packed her own lunches, got herself to piano lessons, learned early how to comfort herself when nobody else did. I thought maybe that would change now that we were older. That maybe adulthood would even the scales. But there I was, gasping in a dark room, the air poisoned and heavy, and all they cared about was the next scene in their movie. Outside, a gust of wind slammed a tree branch against my window. Inside, the smell grew thicker, harsher. I tried to cover my nose with a towel, crawling toward the kitchen on all fours, convinced the source must be there. Nothing on the stove. No open bottles, no flickering flames. Then my vision blurred. I remember crawling, I remember thinking, "Don't fall asleep. You can't fall asleep." I remember the rain pounding harder and harder, as if trying to punch through the roof and warn me. And I remember, just before everything went black, staring at a photo on my wall, me age 6, holding Kelsey's hand at the zoo. She looked scared. I was comforting her. Somehow that image felt cruel now, because no one was holding my hand. No one was coming for me, and yet I wasn't dead. Not yet. Something was about to rip the silence open. But for now, there was only darkness. The first thing I noticed was the light. Not daylight, no, something harsher, blue-white and unkind. The kind of light that hums. Then the beeping, rhythmic, insistent. I tried to lift my hand, but it wouldn't move. My mouth felt glued shut, my throat scratched like it had been dragged through gravel, a voice somewhere to my left. "She's coming to, let's keep her oxygen steady." Oxygen, I opened my eyes. The ceiling above me was unfamiliar, textured tiles, fluorescent glare, and metal rails. My body was strapped, loosely but firmly, to a gurney. There was an oxygen mask on my face. I couldn't speak. Could barely breathe. What was happening? The world tilted again and someone's hand gripped mine, briefly, professionally. A paramedic, his voice calm but distant. "We're taking you to Legacy Emanuel. You've had a chemical inhalation. Try to stay still, okay?" Chemical inhalation. My brain tried to make sense of the words, the smell, the phone call. My dad's voice dismissing me. It wasn't in my head. Something had really happened. Something serious. Panic began to bloom, slow and venomous. I wanted to ask where my family was, if anyone had called them, if they were waiting at the hospital, but I still couldn't speak. My tongue felt like sandpaper. I drifted in and out. Sirens in the distance. The hum of tires on wet roads, a bump that made pain shoot through my side. The next time I woke, it was quieter, still the beeping, still the white lights. But now I was in a hospital bed, IV lines trailing from my arm. My lips were cracked, my hands bandaged. I turned my head slowly and saw a nurse sitting by the door, flipping through a clipboard. She noticed me and smiled, rising. "Hey there, Ellie, don't try to talk yet. You're in recovery. We've got you on fluids and pain management." I blinked. "You were found unconscious in your apartment. Neighbors called 911 after smelling something weird in the hall. There was a small fire in your kitchen. They think it started from a chemical canister under the sink. Possibly a leak. A fire." I stared at the ceiling, trying to wrap my mind around it. "My apartment, my things gone. Do you remember what happened?" she asked gently. I nodded barely. My hands twitched again. I wanted my phone. "Don't worry," she said. "We've already tried reaching your emergency contact. The number just rang and rang." My father, she glanced at the chart. "We'll keep trying." Hours passed. Maybe days. I lost track. Everything hurt. My lungs, my skin, even the air stung when I breathed too deeply. At one point, I managed to croak, "Phone?" They brought it to me, and my heart did a strange, hopeful flutter as I pressed my dad's contact. Straight to voicemail. Again. Nothing. I tried my mom, voicemail. I tried Kelsey. She declined the call. I stared at the screen, my hand trembling. A nurse gently took it from me. "Try to rest," she said, tucking the blanket tighter around my shoulders. "You're safe here." Safe. The word felt foreign because no one had come, not even now. Later, when I was more stable, a woman in a green cardigan wheeled her IV pole into my room. She had half her face covered in gauze and moved slowly, but she smiled at me like we were already friends. "Hey, you're the girl from 3C, right? I'm Dana. I heard about your fire." I nodded. She pointed to her chair. "Mind if I sit?" I didn't. Dana talked about her accident, burns from a backyard grill explosion. Her boyfriend vanished after the ambulance came. She didn't say it bitterly. Just as fact. "They disappear when it's inconvenient," she said softly. "That's when you find out who's real." I think that was the first moment I cried. Quiet, messy tears. Not just from the pain, but the injustice of it, the loneliness, the truth of what she said. I'd been invisible for so long in my own family, I'd started to believe maybe I didn't deserve anything more. But lying there, body broken, lungs struggling, I realized something else. I survived. I survived when no one came. That meant something. More patients came by, nurses too. One taped a silly cartoon to my IV stand. Another left a potted succulent by the window. A man in a wheelchair cracked jokes during dinner trays. They were strangers, but they noticed me. They saw me, which is more than I could say for my own blood. When I finally worked up the strength to call my parents again, I barely recognized my own voice. "Hi," I rasped when my father finally picked up on the 5th try. "It's me." A pause. "Ellie, where have you been? Your mom said you weren't answering." My throat tightened. "I've been in the hospital since the fire. Did no one tell you?" He coughed. We've been busy. Kelsey had a big audition last week. You know how it is." "No, I didn't. We'll try to come by tomorrow," he added quickly, as if that fixed anything. "Okay," I whispered, but I knew they weren't coming. The promise tomorrow came and went, and the day after that, and the one after that. No calls, no visits. No balloons in the hallway with my name on them. Just silence, and not the peaceful kind. The nurses stopped asking if my family was coming. They knew better now. Instead, they started showing up with little gestures, an extra pillow, a magazine left open to a crossword, chocolate pudding hidden beneath the apple slices. I started recognizing shifts by voices in the hallway. Monica on nights, Dave in the mornings, Olivia during the long afternoon lull when the loneliness hit hardest. "Any updates from your folks today?" Dave asked one morning, wheeling in his little cart of breakfast trays. I shook my head, managing a brittle smile. He sighed. "They don't know what they're missing. You've got the best taste in hospital playlists. I still can't believe you got room 214 singing Fleetwood Mac yesterday." A chuckle escaped me. Weak but real. They were keeping me alive, not just with IVs and antibiotics, but with kindness, with eye contact, with laughter that didn't demand anything in return. My hands were wrapped in bandages, stiff and aching, the skin tight and pink from the burns. My legs were weak, barely able to hold my weight the first time I tried to stand. But my spirit, somehow, was reassembling itself piece by piece, fed by these small moments of human decency. One afternoon, Dana wheeled herself back in, balancing a deck of cards on her lap. "Time to lose at gin rummy," she declared. "You're the one who cheats," I teased, reaching for the deck with clumsy fingers. "Only when you're winning," she winked. We played for hours, and in the space between shuffles and jokes, I told her things I hadn't said out loud in years. How Kelsey once told a teacher I copied her homework, when it had been the other way around. How my mom took her shopping while I stayed home with the flu, forgotten. How my birthday last year was postponed twice because of Kelsey's dance rehearsals. It never got rescheduled. "Wow," Dana muttered. That's messed up," I shrugged. "I used to think if I just did everything right, they'd notice me, like I could earn it." Dana looked at me for a long moment. "Some people are blind on purpose, has nothing to do with how good you are." That night I sat in the dark, staring out the hospital window. Raindrops streaked across the glass like tears. But for the first time, I didn't feel like crying. I felt quiet, focused. Maybe I'd never get an apology. Maybe they'd never admit what they'd done or failed to do. But that didn't mean I had to stay the girl who waited by the phone. My body would heal. My lungs would get stronger. The burns would fade into scars. And the silence, it would become space. Space to breathe. Space to choose. Space to begin again on my terms. Recovery isn't a straight line. It loops and backtracks and sometimes just stalls. The first time I walked without assistance, I cried in the hallway. Not from the pain, though it throbbed through every step, but from the weight of how much I'd lost and how far I still had to go. My reflection in the hospital mirror startled me. Gaunt cheeks, bandaged hands, hair dry and brittle at the ends. I looked like someone who'd lived through something catastrophic. And I had. The fire had stolen my apartment, my sense of safety, and what little illusion I had left about my family. But it hadn't taken everything. I was still here. A few days later, Olivia, the nurse with a soft voice and a fierce braid down her back, approached me with a clipboard. "Ellie, the doctors say you're stable enough to be discharged soon," she said gently. "But we need to talk about where you'll go next." My stomach turned. Back home, no, my mouth opened before I had time to filter. "I don't have anywhere." She didn't flinch, didn't pity me, just nodded and sat beside the bed. "You've got temporary recovery housing available for patients in your situation. It's modest but safe. A small room, support staff on hand, shared meals." I exhaled. "I can't afford anything right now," she smiled. "We'll figure that part out. You've got a little time left on your insurance coverage." Later that afternoon, I tried calling my parents again, not to ask for help, just to give them one last chance to show up. My mom answered this time. "Ellie," her voice was flat, distracted. "We're just about to sit down to dinner." "I'm getting released in a few days," I said, keeping my tone light. "They said I'll need help transitioning home." A pause. "Well, your sister's staying with us right now," she said. "You know how the house gets cluttered." "Just for a few days," I asked. "Until I find a place." Another pause. Then, "Ellie, it's not that we don't care, it's just Kelsey's still recovering from her ankle sprain. You understand, don't you?" I didn't, but I said I did. Because it was easier. The next morning, I sat in group therapy for the first time, still numb from the call. Dana wheeled in beside me and gave my arm a little bump. "Deep breath. These things are weird at first." The therapist was kind and steady, but it was the other patients who cracked something open inside me. There was Martin, a mechanic who survived an explosion at work. Leela, whose husband left her during her second skin graft. A retired teacher named Geraldine with burn scars stretching across her chest and a laugh that filled the room. One by one they spoke, about pain, about loss, about being forgotten. When it was my turn, my voice shook. "My name's Ellie," I said. My apartment caught fire. No one from my family came." No one gasped. No one looked away. Instead, Geraldine nodded, her eyes soft. "That kind of fire burns deeper than the skin," she said. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't meant to be. But it stayed with me. The next few days passed in a slow rhythm. Meds, meals, rehab, more group therapy. Each session peeled back another layer of silence I'd lived under for years. By the time discharge day came, I wasn't just being wheeled out, I was walking out. Slowly with my cane, but upright. Head high. They wheeled my tiny suitcase to the curb while I waited for the ride that had been arranged. I kept scanning the lot just in case. Some part of me still hoped, some ridiculous flicker, that maybe, just maybe, I'd see a familiar car. But there was nothing, except a quiet breath of wind that tousled my hair and made me realize I wasn't waiting anymore. They weren't coming, and I was still okay. The diner smelled like old grease and cherry pie when they walked in, my parents. It had been 3 weeks since I'd left the hospital. I was living in a transitional recovery unit now, sharing a hallway with 3 other patients and a nurse named Carla who played Elvis in the mornings. When my dad called and said, "We'd like to take you out, just to talk," I almost said no. Almost. But a small, defiant part of me wanted to see their faces, to hear what flimsy excuses they'd crafted for their absence. Maybe, just maybe, they'd come with something resembling an apology, so I said yes. The diner they chose was one we used to visit when I was a kid. It hadn't changed. Still yellowed menus and booths with torn vinyl seats. Still a jukebox in the corner that hadn't worked in years. I got there early and waited at the booth, fidgeting with the paper straw wrapper. My hands still trembled sometimes. Scars made holding certain things hard, but I managed. They arrived 10 minutes late, all warm smiles and breezy tones. "Ellie," Mom said, sitting beside Dad. "Look at you. You're up and walking." "That's wonderful." I nodded. Dad opened a menu like we were here for pancakes and pleasantries. Small talk flowed, weather, traffic, how Kelsey was considering a Pilates certification. It took 5 agonizing minutes before I finally asked, "Why didn't you come?" My voice was soft, direct. They froze. Dad cleared his throat. "We didn't know how serious it was, honey. You made it sound like you were just feeling a little dizzy." I blinked. "I was unconscious, in an ambulance. I called you begging for help." Mom looked away, fiddling with her napkin. "We didn't realize," she murmured. "And you know how Kelsey is. She was already upset that night. She hates hospitals." "She wasn't in the hospital. I was." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth did the cutting for me. Dad shifted uncomfortably. "Well, we're here now. We thought maybe you'd want to stay with us a few days, regain your strength." My heart gave one foolish thump of hope until Mom added, "Just keep your cane off the rug in the den. It scuffs the floor." And just like that, the thump went quiet. I studied their faces, trying to find the version of them I used to need so badly. The parents I once begged to see me, love me, fight for me. But they weren't there. In their place sat 2 people who had grown used to watching me struggle from a distance and calling it support. I set my fork down gently. "I appreciate the invitation," I said carefully, "but I won't be staying with you." Mom blinked. "Well, don't be dramatic," I smiled. I'm just done pretending this is okay." Dad looked stunned. "Ellie, come on, we're trying." "Then try listening," I said, voice steady. "Try remembering that I called for help while I was choking and you told me to open a window." The air in the diner shifted. Their smiles faded. Silence thickened between us. I stood slowly, gripping my cane. "I think I'll walk back," I said. "It's not far." They didn't stop me. They didn't stand. They just watched as I tapped my way to the door, one step at a time, and maybe they thought I looked broken. But I didn't feel broken. I felt free. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a clean step forward. But even as I slid into the back seat of the cab after that strained dinner, a part of me was still chasing something that didn't exist. That younger version of myself who thought if I just got better, smarter, nicer, they'd finally see me. I let her go that night. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet tasks, appointments, therapy, paperwork. Carla, the night nurse at the recovery unit, had taken to taping affirmations to our room doors. Mine said, "Some bridges are meant to burn, so you can light your own way." I kept it. By the end of the week, the hospital formally released me from their care. Technically, I was no longer a patient. Practically, I was still floating in that uncertain space between survival and stability. When I walked out, cane in hand, it wasn't my family waiting at the curb. It was a social worker named Reed. He had soft eyes, a tired leather satchel, and a voice like a late-night podcast. He didn't make small talk. "I found a place for you," he said as we drove through the gray sprawl of Portland. "Temporary housing, not fancy, but clean, safe." He glanced over. "You've got about 3 weeks of insurance coverage left, After that, we'll have to look at other options. I nodded. Understood. Try not to let that pressure you, he added. You've already made it through the worst. The rest is just logistics. But it didn't feel like just logistics. When you don't have a place to land, even tomorrow feels like a threat. The building was beige and unremarkable, converted office space with thin walls and flickering hall lights. My room had a twin bed, a metal desk, and a narrow window facing a chain-link fence. But I made the bed myself. And for the first time in months, I slept without tubes or monitors or machines blinking at my side. The following morning, I stood in the shared kitchenette, trying to open a jar of jam with trembling hands. My grip was still weak. Scar tissue made it worse. After a few tries, I let it clatter back onto the counter. A quiet voice behind me asked, "Want help?" I turned to see a woman about my age, short, dark curls, a scar on her jaw, denim jacket, even indoors. She held out her hand. "I'm Myra," she said. "Room 4B, you're new." I nodded. "Ellie, 3C." She popped the lid off the jar effortlessly. "There, human magic." I smiled, really smiled. Myra didn't ask what happened to me, and I didn't ask her either. That's how it worked here. Everyone was rebuilding something. We respected the silence between stories. We sat together that morning, eating toast and watching the rain dance on the glass. "I used to hate rain," Myra said. "Now it feels honest." That stuck with me. Later that week, I attended another group therapy session. But this time, it wasn't in the hospital. It was at a community center tucked behind a strip mall with a sign that just said, "Thursday Circle." I almost didn't go in, but Dana had texted me, "You promised, besides, they have good cookies." So I went, and she was right. The room was warm, with folding chairs and donated blankets. A middle-aged woman in a Seahawks hoodie passed me a cup of tea as I sat down. We went around the circle, and when it was my turn, I spoke without shaking. "My name's Ellie. I was in a fire. My family didn't show up for me, but strangers did, and that's changing how I think about what family means." There were no gasps, no pitying nods, just quiet understanding. Someone clapped softly. Someone else smiled. And that was enough. Walking home afterward, I passed a bookstore with a help wanted sign in the window. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The air smelled like old paper and lavender. A woman behind the counter looked up. "Can I help you?" "I hope so," I said. "I'm looking for a new chapter." The job at the bookstore wasn't glamorous. Minimum wage, short hours, mostly restocking and sweeping crumbs out of the children's reading nook. But to me, it felt like standing on dry land after months adrift. The owner, Joni, was a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and an allergy to small talk. She handed me a mop and said, "You show up, you work hard, we get along. You cry in the back room, I bring you tissues and don't ask questions." It was the most generous onboarding speech I'd ever heard. By the end of my first week, I could feel something shifting. The muscles in my legs stopped shaking every time I stood. I learned how to stack romance paperbacks without collapsing the whole shelf. My hands, though scarred, remembered how to turn pages, how to carry boxes, how to hold without trembling. I was reclaiming small things, and then the diner incident happened. It was a Tuesday evening. I just finished a double shift and wanted a grilled cheese more than anything. The corner diner had been my go-to for years. I didn't expect them to be there. But as I walked in, there they were. Kelsey, my parents. All three crowded into a booth, laughing over milkshakes. Kelsey's blonde hair was swept into a perfect high ponytail. My father was holding her phone, chuckling at something on the screen. They didn't see me right away. I froze by the door, unsure if I wanted them to. But I must have made a sound, a shift, a gasp, maybe just the quiet sound of heartbreak blooming again, because Kelsey turned. Her eyes met mine. Then her expression curdled like milk in the sun. "Oh, God," she muttered, loud enough for the table to hear. "She's here." Mom looked up next, her smile dimmed. "Ellie, hello." I didn't move. Then Dad chimed in, his tone too casual. "You look better. How's your leg?" Kelsey snorted into her straw. "Guess the limp isn't permanent." Something in me snapped. I stepped forward, slow and careful, gripping my cane. "I didn't come here to see you," I said quietly. "Just wanted dinner." Kelsey gave a theatrical sigh. "We don't want to take care of a disabled person, Ellie. We've got enough going on." The word hit harder than expected. Disabled. She said it like it was shameful, like it was contagious. I looked at my parents. I wasn't asking for them to rise up in outrage, but maybe, flinch, say something, but no, they sat frozen. Mom's fingers curled tighter around her fork. Dad cleared his throat but said nothing. Kelsey leaned back, smug. See, this is why we didn't want you at home. Everything has to revolve around your trauma. I felt the eyes of strangers in the diner turning toward us. A waitress paused mid-step. I gripped my cane harder. Enjoy your milkshakes, I said, turning toward the door. Behind me, my cane tapped softly with each step. Sharp, certain, like a metronome keeping time with the sound of betrayal. Back in my room, I didn't cry. I sat on my narrow bed, staring at the wall and thought, they're never going to change. And maybe I didn't need them to. Maybe the real strength was finally walking away without hoping they'd follow. That night, as I drifted to sleep, I remembered something Geraldine said in group therapy the week before. You don't owe anyone your peace, not even family. And she was right. I didn't mean to fall apart in the hospital lobby, but after the scene at the diner, my body decided for me. By the time I reached the recovery unit that night, my legs gave out before I made it to the elevator. A nurse named Alana caught me, helped me into a wheelchair, and wheeled me to the nurse's station without a word. I remember her hand resting briefly on my shoulder. Steady. Human. You're back, she said softly. I nodded, unable to speak. My room was still available, the one they called the garden room because it faced a narrow alley with a single potted plant on a windowsill. Someone had taped up welcome back streamers in crooked lines. It made me smile through the fog. The moment the door closed behind me, I sobbed into my pillow. The kind of crying that doesn't feel clean or cathartic. The kind that comes from too many things cracking all at once. I wasn't mourning just the insult at the diner. I was mourning the realization that no apology would ever come. That my parents, my sister, they weren't confused or temporarily callous. They were consistent, predictable. And I had finally, painfully accepted that. A few hours later, I heard a knock at my door. I wiped my face and croaked, "Yeah." It was Carla, the night nurse. She didn't speak, just came in holding a potted ivy plant with a ribbon on the side that read, "You're rooted here." She set it on my nightstand. "It's yours now, the window was looking bare." I managed a tiny laugh. "You're not supposed to give patients gifts." "I'll pretend I found it," she said, winked and left. That night I didn't feel abandoned. I felt held. The next day, Reed came by with his clipboard and a thin smile. "I've been trying to extend your housing window," he said. "No luck so far, you've got 13 days left before insurance stops covering the room." I nodded. "I'll figure something out." "We'll figure something out," he corrected gently. "You're not doing this alone." After he left, I sat in the tiny courtyard outside the hospital cafe, watching autumn leaves swirl through the air like tiny dancers. That's when I heard my name. "Ellie." I turned. At first, I didn't recognize her. But then I did Bait, from high school. We used to volunteer at the animal shelter together. Back when my life still had sleepovers and shared playlists. She rushed over, wrapping me in a hug before I could react. "I saw your name online. One of the nurses shared your story. You're a freaking miracle, Elle." I blinked at her, stunned. "I didn't know anyone even remembered me." She laughed. "Are you kidding? You helped me through the worst breakup of my life junior year. And you gave me that hand-drawn card when my dog died. I still have it." I swallowed hard. She wasn't alone. Behind her were 3 more familiar faces. Josh, who used to share his lunch with me. Tara, who once cried in the girls' bathroom after failing a test. Melanie, who brought cookies to every group project. They brought balloons, cookies, and most importantly, presents. They didn't ask for details about the fire. They didn't push for a dramatic retelling. They just sat with me in the courtyard, telling old stories, laughing at memories I'd half forgotten and promising they wouldn't disappear again. "You've got more people in your corner than you think," Bait said, gently squeezing my hand. And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. That night, back in my room, I taped one of the cookies packaging to my wall next to the ivy plant and streamers. It felt like the beginning of something. The phone call came 2 days later. I was sorting through donated clothes in the volunteer room at the recovery center when Carla peeked her head in. "You've got a call," she said, holding out the portable phone. "He says it's urgent." My hand froze above a folded hoodie. No one ever called me, not anymore. I took the receiver with a cautious, "Hello." "Ellie," My father's voice was rushed, unfamiliar in its urgency. Your grandfather is asking for you. He's not well. I sat down hard on the edge of the sorting table. Grandpa. My voice cracked. What happened? He's been sick for a while, but today was bad. He's asking for you over and over. My mind reeled. I hadn't spoken to my grandfather in nearly a year. He'd always been kind to me when I was little, gardening together, teaching me how to whistle with grass between our thumbs. But somewhere along the way, visits grew rare, and his presence dimmed under the louder voices of my parents and sister. I assumed they hadn't told him about the fire, about the hospital, about anything. Now he was asking for me. I'll come, I said without hesitation. The address had changed. He'd moved in with my aunt across town after his last fall. I showered, packed an overnight bag just in case, and Reed arranged a ride. As we drove through the quiet, pine-lined streets of outer Portland, I tried not to imagine worst-case scenarios. Tried not to let guilt claw at me for not reaching out sooner. I hadn't even known where he was. When we arrived, my aunt met me at the door. Her eyes were puffy but kind. He's been in and out, she said softly. But when he's awake, he keeps asking for you. Where's my girl with the clumsy garden hands? That's what he keeps calling you. My throat tightened. I stepped into the dim room at the end of the hall. Grandpa was lying in bed, thinner than I remembered, skin pale against the pillow. A small oxygen machine buzzed quietly at his side. He turned his head slowly, and when his eyes found mine, they lit up. Ellie, he rasped, voice thick with emotion. I crossed the room and gently took his hand, thin, veined, familiar. I'm here, Grandpa. His eyes welled. Why didn't anyone tell me about the fire, about the hospital? I blinked. They didn't. He shook his head weakly. Your parents said you were off traveling, that you were finding yourself. I let out a bitter laugh. In a burn unit, he squeezed my hand. You look like hell. I grinned. You always said I'd make a comeback story. His smile was faint but real. And then, quietly, he asked me to tell him everything. So I did. Sitting beside his bed, I told him about the fire, the nights in the ICU, the phone calls that went unanswered. I told him about Kelsey's words in the diner, about the cane, the pain, the people who stepped in when family didn't. He listened with closed eyes and a furrowed brow. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. Then he said, They lied to me about everything. His hand tightened around mine. I promised you the garden house, he murmured. The one with the glass sunroom, when you were 9, remember? You said you wanted to plant strawberries there. I remember, I whispered. I told them over and over that it was for you. He turned his head toward the door where my aunt stood silently. Call Alan, he told her firmly. Get the lawyer here now. Dad, she started, surprised. I said now. His voice, though gravelly, carried the weight of steel. She nodded and left the room. He turned back to me, his eyes steady. They don't get to bury this, not anymore. You're the only one who ever came when I needed help. We sat there in silence after that, the air thick with unspoken truths and overdue justice. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen, not because I begged for it, but because I'd earned it. The lawyer arrived early the next morning. Alan Riker. I remembered him vaguely from holidays when I was little, always in a wool coat, always smelling faintly of cigars and eucalyptus. He looked surprised to see me sitting beside Grandpa's bed, still in the same sweatshirt from the day before. But Grandpa's voice, though weaker, was crystal clear. She stays, he said as Alan approached. And no delays. Alan gave a slow nod, pulling out a folder and clicking open his pen. We're updating the will then. Grandpa's eyes didn't waver. Immediately. My aunt hovered in the hallway, shifting nervously from foot to foot. I caught glimpses of her pacing every time the door cracked open. At one point, I heard my father's voice on the phone in the living room. Muffled, panicked. But in this room, everything felt calm. Grandpa gestured for me to sit again, then took my hand while Alan began reading aloud the terms. The old will had divided his estate equally between his children, my father, aunt, and uncle. The new one made a quiet, seismic shift. The house, the garden house with the glass sunroom, the same one I'd knelt in to plant strawberries as a child, was being left to me. Full ownership, Grandpa said, his voice like rusted iron. No dispute, no contesting. Alan's eyebrows rose. Are you certain you want to make this change permanent, Mr. Bellamy? Grandpa didn't hesitate. I'm certain my granddaughter nearly died and no one thought to tell me. I'm certain she sat beside me when I asked for her and the rest didn't show. I'm certain that girl needs a home more than anyone I know. So yes, I'm certain. My throat closed up. I hadn't come here for anything. Not money, not property. I just wanted to be remembered. But now, sitting in the sunlight filtering through gauzy curtains, I realized I'd never been forgotten. Not by him. Alan made notes. Grandpa signed with shaking fingers. I witnessed it, initials trembling where I'd never imagined they'd be. And when it was done, Grandpa turned to me again. "I'm tired," he whispered, "but I'm not angry anymore." I squeezed his hand. "I'll take care of the garden," I said softly. "I'll keep it growing." He nodded once, then closed his eyes. He didn't wake up again. That night I sat beside him in the dark, the machines quiet, the nurses respectful. I didn't cry the way I thought I would. Instead, I sat in gratitude for his timing, for his truth, for the space he made for me at the end, even when no one else did. The following week was a blur. Paperwork, logistics, decisions I never thought I'd have to make. My aunt stayed distant, speaking to me only when absolutely necessary. My father and Kelsey didn't come to the reading of the will, but their silence was its own response. When Alan read the new terms aloud, I could almost feel the ripple moving through the family like a quake under polite expressions. But I didn't flinch. The house was mine now, not because I demanded it, but because someone saw my worth and chose to make it undeniable. The day I stepped into the garden house alone, a low fog hung over the yard. It smelled of damp cedar and old promises. The key turned easily in the lock, like it had been waiting for me. The house creaked as I entered, quiet, not ominous. It had that worn-in hush of spaces filled with history and dust motes. The floors still sloped in the back hallway. The kitchen tiles still bore the same crack from when I dropped a jar of jam at age 11. But the sunroom, it took my breath away. The glass walls were streaked with rain and green with lichen, but light still spilled in like a miracle. I stood there for a long time, just letting it warm my face. I didn't know how to own something this big. Not physically, logistics I could figure out, but emotionally, spiritually. I didn't yet know how to receive something so unconditionally given. Still, I knew I would try. I spent the first few days sweeping out cobwebs and washing linens. Myra and Bates showed up one weekend with boxes of thrifted plates and a used toaster that worked when it wanted to. "We're nesting you," Myra said, stacking mismatched mugs in the cabinet. Bate laughed. "You're our DIY recovery project now, better than reality TV." It wasn't just a house anymore, it was becoming a home. One shelf, one warm meal, one painted wall at a time. And then came the call. I was planting tiny strawberry seedlings in a corner of the backyard, just like I promised Grandpa when my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, dirt on my gloves. I answered anyway. "Ellie, it's your mom." I stood slowly, the trowel dangling at my side. "What is it?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "I just heard about the will," she said quickly. "You could have told us." I laughed once. "I could have told you. Like you told Grandpa I was off finding myself instead of in a hospital bed." There was a long pause. "We didn't mean for it to get so ugly. It got ugly the night you left me alone with smoke in my lungs and a fire in my kitchen," I said quietly. Her voice trembled. "We were afraid," Kelsey said. "This isn't about Kelsey anymore," I interrupted. "You let her set the pace of everything, and I paid the price." Another pause. "Your father's upset." "I'm sure he is. He says it's not fair." "No," I said, glancing at the house behind me. "It's not fair that it took almost dying for me to finally get what was promised, but here we are. Ellie, we're still your parents." I didn't respond right away. Then I said, "You were, but I'm building something else now." The line was silent for a moment. "Goodbye, Mom," and I hung up. That night I didn't cry. I lit a candle in the sunroom, curled up in Grandpa's old chair, and watched the sky turn amber through the glass. The garden house was mine, and not just in title or deed, in heart, in healing, in every little growing thing I was finally planting, inside and out. The will was read in a quiet room at the lawyer's office, 2 weeks after Grandpa passed. Alan sat at the head of a mahogany table, papers arranged with surgical precision. I sat at one end, Myra beside me, not because she had to be, but because she insisted. Emotional support best friend, she whispered with a wink, and I squeezed her hand under the table. My parents arrived late. My father walked in with a jaw locked tight enough to crack teeth. My mother wore oversized sunglasses, even though we were indoors. Kelsey trailed behind them, arms crossed, face blank. Not one of them looked at me. Alan began, his voice clear, unshaken by the storm brewing beneath those carefully dressed expressions. To my beloved granddaughter, Ellie Marie Bellamy, he read, I leave full ownership of the property located at 2414 Linden Grove Lane, known as the Bellamy Garden House, as promised. A silence fell so thick you could have sliced it with a butter knife. My father leaned forward. That property was always discussed as part of the family estate. Alan didn't look up. The deceased made a legal, notarized change to his will. It overrides all previous verbal understandings. Kelsey laughed under her breath. Figures, you always land on your feet, don't you, Ellie? I met her eyes. No, I was pushed. Then I crawled, then I stood, now I'm walking. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling. How could he? He knew how much we depended on that house. Alan's gaze was steady. He also knew who showed up when it mattered. A low, vibrating rage simmered beneath my father's exterior. This will won't stand, will contest. You're welcome to try, Alan said coolly. But it's airtight, and if you pursue that, the rest of the estate's distribution may be frozen in litigation for years. Myra leaned in, whispering, Translation, sit down, shut up. I almost laughed. They sat back, defeated but not deflated. Not yet. My parents had always been experts in quiet warfare, guilt, silence, reputational whispers. But their power didn't reach me anymore. When the meeting ended, I stood slowly, cane in hand. Grandpa gave me the house because he saw what you wouldn't, I said softly. And if you're upset, good. That means you understand exactly what you lost. I turned to leave. Myra followed, proud. Kelsey's voice rang out behind me. You'll be alone in that house, Ellie. I didn't turn around. Instead, I said, I was already alone in a room full of people who were supposed to love me. Now I get to choose who walks through the door. We walked out into the sunlight. That night back at the house, I sat in the garden with my shoes off, feet buried in the cool soil. Myra was inside baking banana bread, her music spilling softly through the screen door. I looked around at the growing strawberry patch, the ivy curling along the fence, the sunroom glowing from within. This was mine, not because I won it, but because I survived for it, because I earned it through fire and silence and finally my own voice. And I knew, deep in my bones, that no one could take that from me again. 3 months later, my house is full of people. Not the ones who ignored my phone call or called my pain an inconvenience. The ones who stayed, who showed up, who brought mismatched chairs and homemade lasagna and made the place feel like a heartbeat. Myra stands at the stove in an apron she claims is purely decorative, while bait strings fairy lights along the windows. Dana, yes, Dana from the burn unit, rolls in from the garden with a tray of cupcakes and dirt on her sleeves. She jokes, You know, when I said I wanted a garden party, I didn't think I'd be potting marigolds at 6 p.m. The music is soft, the laughter is loud, and the scent of rosemary and banana bread fills every room. This is my housewarming party. My real family is here. Not perfect people, not related by blood, but tied together by something deeper. The choice to care, to return, to witness one another's lives with compassion. I step into the sunroom, my favorite place in the world, and clink a spoon gently against my glass. Everyone quiets. I never thought I'd say this, I begin, my voice calm, but I'm grateful for everything that burned. A few smiles, some knowing nods. If the fire hadn't happened, I'd still be trying to earn love from people who never intended to give it. I'd still be making myself small just to fit in a room I was never meant to be in. I pause, letting the words settle. But now I know I deserve more. And not because I suffered, but because I saw the truth. And I chose better. I raise my glass. To boundaries, chosen families, and burning what no longer serves you. The room erupts in cheers and clinks and warmth. Afterward, as the night winds down, I find myself outside alone, barefoot in the grass, gazing at the moon. The strawberry plants are sprouting, tiny leaves reaching for the sky like they believe in it. And maybe, for the first time in my life, I do too. I'm still healing. Some nights I wake up gasping. Some days I stare too long at my reflection, wondering what's been lost. But most of the time I feel whole, not because I went back to who I was, but because I became someone new, stronger, clearer, rooted. This house is my beginning. This life is mine. And for anyone watching, anyone still waiting for that moment when it gets better, let this be your sign. You don't have to earn love. You just have to believe you deserve better than silence. Now, tell me, where are you watching this from? And have you ever had to walk away from someone you thought you couldn't live without? Leave your story in the comments. Let's grow together.